Hello everyone, Akinov here, and I'm back with another Let's Talk. This is in particularly kind of a response to a recent Game Theory episode. So MatPat, if you're listening, cool, whatever, I don't care. Actually this is just more for myself than anything else. Anyway, so he recently did a theory on Pokemon Go and how it's canonically the first game in the series, or at least it would fit in his opinion. Well, as I was watching that, I came to this other conclusion to how he was thinking about it. He was saying stuff about how it answers when and why and where the whole Pokemon War thing happened. And I'm like, well, that's all good and all, but it may also answer something else. What are Pokemon? And you may be thinking to yourself, they're little or not so little animals with superpowers, right? And what if they're not? The idea that I've come up with, it's a bit of a stretch, to be honest. There's certain things that I'm like, that just wouldn't make it, that would just make it impossible, right? But it's not necessarily true. So the idea that I have is, what if, even in the Pokemon universe, Pokemon aren't actually real? They are, in fact, AI. Now, what is AI? AI is something that hasn't been invented yet, not a proper human level AI or sentient AI. And that's a whole complex issue, but the point that I'm trying to say here is, what if Pokemon aren't physically there? And you may be thinking a lot of things, like, how would that work? Don't Pokemon interact with people? And that's where Pokemon Go actually comes in. Because the thing about Pokemon Go is it is augmented reality. Very rudimentary, well, not very, but quite rudimentary augmented reality. That is a long way to go before it could even come to resemble the Pokemon that we know from, say, the anime or the games. Now, you see, when actually, there's a quote that I quite like, even though it's from Sword Art Online, which a lot of people are like, that gets really weird after a point, and it kind of does. It's kind of enjoyable for like the first half of the first season, but anyway, there's a quote that Kirito says about how the only difference between virtual reality and reality is the amount of information. So what if augmented reality is the same? So augmented reality, as we're sort of seeing it, is you see something that's not really there. But what if we reach the point where we don't just see it, we hear it, we can maybe even smell it, we can even feel it. Now, this would require probably invasive implants in the brain that would allow us to feel like we're interacting with something. Now, this would probably, here's one thing about this. You would, in fact, be able to be like, I am only imagining that this is here. I can push my hand through it. And you would push your hand through it. And that would be fine. So what happens when you start, if you grew up your whole life with this implant in your head, and you always perceive these things to be there? In every way they seem real because the amount of information that's going through your implant and tricking your brain makes it look like to you that there is a Pokemon there. It's quite an interesting idea. So could the Pokemon world exist in that basis? Maybe. Maybe it evolved from, say, Pokemon Go as we know it. It's kind of not that great. It doesn't have all the features that we want. But maybe, just maybe, it advances to the point where we have, good AR goggles or AR glasses that we can wear, and they're like, it's like, hey, I can just look around, wear my glasses, and I can see Pokemon. That's cool. And maybe the glasses get features added which allow us to be like, I'm just making a hand motion and I'm throwing a Pokeball. Or maybe they pick up audio and start to be able to distinguish attacks. And it starts as a simple follow the instructions given, but nothing too complicated. And eventually, we get to the point where we get the implant, because we want to be more immersed. And then we start to forget that it's not there. We forget that it's not real. We forget that it's imaginary. But it's not imaginary because it's become AI. And AI is a real thing, or at least in the scenario it is. Say the AI thinks, it feels. I don't know about feeling, but it thinks. This really complicated data thinks, and it forms opinions. It may like you, it may not like you. And you can interact with it, and interacting with it changes its opinion. It molds how it thinks about you. You can teach it. Imagine that. That is a weird ass idea about how Pokemon Go could lead to real Pokemon that aren't real. So, on that basis, if Pokemon aren't real in the Pokemon universe, does that work for the games? Well, let's take a look at Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Green. Okay, so can you think of any time where you actually see anyone particularly interact more, like actually be pushed or moved by a Pokemon? Not particularly. And what about all the strength puzzles and cup puzzles? What if those aren't real either? That's the thing you got to consider. People need to be real for this to work. But objects in the world don't. For all you know, you could believe you're stuck and not actually be able to go through when you really can. It's a really weird idea, that in and of itself, but let's consider that the game's just a game and it has to follow game rules for a bit, and that the universe doesn't necessarily follow those rules. So a Pokemon can't necessarily interact with anything. Now the anime would tell you differently. It very much would. And certain aspects of the game definitely probably would. Or at least I think they would. Or you'd think they would. Now, let's go to Gen 2. Gen 2, Gold, Silver, and not Platinum. Crystal. Platinum's Gen 4, William. Akinoff. Whatever my name is. We know my name. It's William. But anyway. In Gen 2, the big instance of a Pokemon interacting with something in the real world that you notice would be they're used for things like power, or like the Electrode, or they're used, or Dragonite Hyper Beams, those guys. But it's interesting. Hyper Beam doesn't really seem to hurt them too much. They seem to feel it, but then there's no physical harm done or anything. And the Electrode, sure, maybe they're really there, but why does fainting them make them disappear? Make them not still be there to later just power up the machine? Well, if they are digital, if they are pure digital creatures, and now we're stepping onto Digimon's toes here, but let's ignore Digimon for now. I may talk about Digimon later. If they are AI, well, maybe they're just programmed to, once they faint, disappear and reappear somewhere later. Now that's a bit of a weird stretch, because the they actually supply power? Or do they? What if they're just running the machine? What if they're just a condition? It's a weird idea that they're just a condition, but it could actually be true. What if their AI is just being used to run a complicated machine and not supply power? It could look like the power went off when they interacted with it, when they were removed, but it's not necessarily that they actually were supplying the power. Now this is getting into a bunch of weird stuff, okay? And the Pokemon games are obviously not meant to be this. But what if they were? That's the point I'm trying to make here. Like, of course there's things like Surf and all that, that's like, yeah, that's obviously a Pokemon interacting with the world. So there are examples in even Gen 1. And you can't say it's realistic for the actual Pokemon world, because this wouldn't... The thing about this theory is, it wouldn't actually apply to the Pokemon world. Or would it? Because you see, what if what you're catching isn't actually that small, I don't know, cute, yellow rodent? What if it's actually just a robot? Now we get into the complicated territory. Yeah. What if there are robots going around? Well, I'm just rambling about weird Pokemon ideas. The real world under the augmented Pokemon reality. That would be really messed up. And again, for all I know, my world could be augmented reality. But hey, who cares? I'll figure it out. I won't figure it out. I'll just go with it. That's the way it works. Anyway. Besides that, I was just thinking this would be a really cool idea, even just as a premise for a sci-fi story or something like that. It's just this really cool idea that not necessarily true within the Pokemon universe, but kind of cool if you just consider it. Like, there's a bunch of other things that it would make sense, because why do Pokemon only ever fade and very rarely die? And why was killing the Marowak in Pokemon Red such a big deal? Why did it have so much consequences? Well, here's the thing. The idea is that you are actually killing something that you could potentially kill a Pokemon in this world that I am envisioning right now of its augmented reality. You could kill a Pokemon by deleting its AI. But what if you do an imperfect job? What if it's not properly deleted? Well, maybe there's some sort of ghost in the shell sort of scenario. Some remnant of the data that's a glitch that continues to exist beyond death. That's weird. Really weird. Anyway, I'm not finished yet. Another point to note is that you can simply go to a Pokemon Center and restore a Pokemon's health. Now, imagine that this is like a Pokestop. Like the Pokestops we have now. You just walk up, choose to restore your Pokemon's health, and there is a completely virtual augmented reality Nurse Joy just standing there. And that's why they all look the same, because they are also not real. Well, that's getting a bit further. And on another interesting note, you can't actually carry in real life. You wouldn't be able to carry 99 potions or 99 Pokeballs. It would just be impractical. But it would make sense if it was if these things were virtual, that you could carry them. Also, answer a lot of questions about what happens, how a Pokemon transferred, how they kept them balls. Well, they're not. The ball is just a representation to us of where our Pokemon is. It is if it's an AI, it simply exists as data. And the whole being converted to data thing is like, well, it doesn't have to be, because it always is data, and it always will be data. Now that's a real mindfuck, isn't it? Kinda. Not really, if you really think about it. Anyway, this is just a few ideas about it. They instantly heal. They have, and their magical abilities. You may have noticed in the anime, they don't really hurt people all that much. Like, even at their worst, they only sort of harm people. And they recover basically instantly. And all real harm comes from falling, tripping, hurting oneself, etc. Now, that's not to say that the Pokemon anime is not set in a, how would I put this, world where Pokemon are actually real, but the idea still stands that it could quite realistically come to be that we live in a world where Pokemon are just that inch from real. That they fight in the streets, that they live all around us, that they invade our homes, that they become our pets, our friends, even though they're not really physically there, even though they're data. AI becoming friends to humans. Quite an interesting idea. And it's all technically imaginably possible. I mean, if we succeed in quantum computing, get actual quantum computers running, AI is not that far. AI and quantum computing, if we achieve one of them, we should be able to achieve the other. If we achieve quantum computing, we should either have already achieved AI or be able to achieve AI thanks to quantum computing. Not that most people know what quantum computing is, but, or what the more accurate definitions are. And I'm still kind of fuzzy on that, having only been lectured by one of the leading professors on quantum computing. But yeah. Anyway, these are just some of my thoughts on the idea of what Pokemon Go could actually mean in the Pokemon universe. It could mean that this whole Pokemon universe that we imagine could also exist in another situation where none of the Pokemon are actually physically there. Mine's been acting enough. Hope you've had a good time, and good night or something like that anyway. Hope you've enjoyed this little response to MatPat's Fairy. See you next time.